So let me share with you my understanding of it. So when we're breathing, the physical breath, we take in air, the oxygen goes to the lungs. At a more subtle level, we're really breathing prana, we're breathing life force. So when the air comes into the nostrils, it enters the Ida and the Pingala, and it's this prana, this life force, that's then circulated through the body. So the Ida and the Pingala, and if you've ever seen the medical caduceus that has the rod and the two serpents intertwining around that, think of that as the Ida and the Pingala. So when we breathe in, the oxygen goes from there all the way down to the base of the spine, and then we exhale. So as long as we're having an experience of duality, so long as we're active and having thoughts, we're breathing, the energy is moving through these two particular nadis. When we go into deep meditation and the prana becomes balanced, the inhale and the exhale are balanced, there's a pause that takes place. Some of you may have experienced that already in meditation. And it's in that pause that the prana, the life force, moves into the Sushumna Nadi, begins the gradual upliftment, the upsurge of the Kundalini energy. And when this happens, you'll notice that the breathing, first of all, slows down, and sometimes it can come to a complete stop. This is called kumbhak, where we have a spontaneous retention of breath. So we go into states of deep samadhi, and we're no longer having thoughts and the body's no longer active. We're in the state of pure awareness. There's very little need for oxygen and air. So we're surviving on the movement of the prana, the awakened kundalini, as it were, moving in the Sushumna Nadi. I've experienced myself this sometimes for hours at a time, where there's no need for breath. Lakshman Ju, the great guru in Kashmir, on his birthday every year, used to demonstrate this. He would go into samadhi and sit for 6 hours with no breath, no movement. He would give darshan, people would come for his blessings. So this is a natural state. We don't have to practice it. As long as we practice meditation, the energy will naturally bring us to the state of kumbhak, and we can stay in this state. We call that samadhi. And there are different levels of samadhi that we can experience. Now, one of the things that can facilitate this experience is something that we call Shaktipat. The word Shakti is the divine energy, universal consciousness. Pat means the descent of. So it's the descent of the divine energy. It can come directly from universal consciousness, from the Supreme Being. It can happen, this awakening can happen through our own practice of meditation, Hatha Yoga. Traditionally, it's an awakening that takes place with the assistance of a guru, a sadguru, a fully enlightened being, has the capacity to transmit this fully awakened energy into a student and awaken the corresponding energy. And this traditionally is done in 4 ways. It can be done through a look. A teacher can look at the disciple. That's what happened with me. My teacher looked at me, and there was a transmission of energy that awakened me. Or the student can look at the teacher. It can be done through a mantra. That's why mantra initiation is so valued in many traditions. The guru has used a particular mantra to realize the self, and when he imparts or initiates a disciple into that mantra, the sound becomes the vehicle for carrying the energy and can awaken a disciple instantly. Look can be through a thought. One can think about the guru, or the guru can think about you, or have what's called a sankalpa, an intention to awaken that energy. and also through the physical touch. My own guru, he used all four of these as means of awakening, of giving Shaktipat. In fact, he created a 2-day program called the Shaktipat Intensive for the specific purpose of awakening the Kundalini. Again, divine, whether we call it universal consciousness or divine consciousness, these are words. This is language. And so in religious language, we would say it's God, it's divine, it's Shiva, it's Shakti, it's Buddha, it's Allah, it's grace. So it's okay, we can use religious language if that's helpful, but not necessary. One can practice meditation, you can be a Buddhist, a Muslim, a Christian, a Hindu, or you can be a complete atheist, agnostic. That consciousness still exists within us. So we use the term universal consciousness. Sometimes we use the term Shiva. We're not talking about a particular deity. That's the name we use for this universal consciousness. So I actually prefer the term universal consciousness, but we embrace all the different traditions. So in the tradition of religion, which a lot of them are bhakti, feeling related. So if one has a love for a particular deity, that can be helpful on the spiritual path, until it's not. There's a saying in the Buddhist tradition, when you meet the Buddha on the path, slay him, right? So the idea of a Jesus or an Allah or a Buddha it can be helpful because it opens the heart. It connects us to a higher energy, a higher purpose, and it works along the path until we get to the point where we are stuck by the concept, limited by a belief. Once it limits us, it's no longer helpful. Then we can step off the path and go directly to the experience itself. So think about meditation as a conveyor belt. It takes us from where we are to the highest reality. And some of us have a religious bent, others don't. So this is a completely universal path, can be practiced by anyone, because we're all the same self. If we were born in India, we're probably Hindu or Buddhist. Born in America, you're probably Christian or Jewish. Depends where you're born. That's your karma. But we all have a self. That's what we have in common. That's the goal of second education, is to give us the tools to know who I am and to know what's my path. Some will be Christian, some will remain Buddhist. It's okay to practice your own religion. Meditation and second education will enhance your experience of your own tradition. It will make it come alive to you. When I was 18, I rejected the Christian tradition. I was raised Catholic. I renounced it. Once I learned how to meditate, I realized what the Christian tradition was really about. Went beyond the church's teachings and the Pope and all the laws and all the rules, but it was really a direct experience of the Christ. Not the person Jesus, but I think of the Christ as a synonym for the Atman within. Once I experienced that through my teacher, I went back and could really embrace my tradition with a new understanding. In fact, for 5 years, I led Christian retreats in Italy, in Assisi, basing the teachings on St. Francis of Assisi. So once one has a direct experience of this inner consciousness, we begin to see that same truth expressed in different ways, in different traditions. The Buddha might express it this way: it's a non-self. The self doesn't really exist. A Hindu would say, thou art that we're the Paramatman, A Vaishnavite would say it's Krishna. A Shaivite would say it's Shiva. These are just names. These are words. They're meant to uplift us, not to limit us and to bind us. There's a traditional story in India that's told about the 6 blind men who were asked to describe an elephant, and they all stood there and were touching a different part of the elephant. First one had his arms around the leg, and he said, "Oh, it's like a big tree trunk." Right? The other blind man was at the back and grabbed onto the tail. "Oh, it's like a big broom." Oh, right? And so on and so forth. Each of them had part of the truth and expressed it as best they could. And that's the way I view the religious traditions. They're all true. They all have part of the truth. And once we experience the truth directly for ourselves, we can see the truth in all the traditions. There are 7. I did 1, 2, 3. I think I maybe did 5, 4 or 5. I think I did 5. Yeah. Yeah. So these, I'm basing the meditation we just did on a chakra meditation is designed by Brahamananda Sangha Swami, Shankarananda. And in that tradition, he has found that most of us are able to experience and feel these chakras more keenly. Now, I also do a 7 chakra meditation a little later. Once people can really get the sense of how these 4 major ones feel, because this is where we feel the contractions most. If I ask somebody to look at the base of the spine, most people don't feel much there. Later in more advanced meditations, as we cultivate this ability to feel, we can do the 7 chakras. I have another meditation that I like to do using sound, using the bija mantras and repeating the bija mantras for all 7 of the chakras. And we'll do that later in the course. But the reason I do the 4 is because it's most easy at the beginning level to feel those. I can feel what's going on in my abdomen. I can feel what's going on in my heart. I can feel what's going on here. But what's happening at the base of my spine and the sexual organs, I'm not as sensitive to yet. And so that's why I teach the just 4. But we will do 7. Talk about centering yourself, finding the center of yourself. And some traditions say this is the core, this is the center. Some say this is the center, But the center is not in a physical location. It's in a more subtle dimension. So if I think about the center as the self, causal body, subtle body, physical body as outer layers of it, where we put our awareness and our feeling, we do it according to our own tradition. So the Vidyabhairava Tantra, for example, will teach us to meditate on something they call the Dvadashanta, the distance of 12 fingers, and to watch the movement of the breath. These are focusing techniques, awareness techniques that we can use, and they all work. So it's not that one is better than the other, one is not right and the other wrong. So some traditions say meditate on the center being in the gut. Others say meditate here. And I think of the center here, if I'm looking at it from the yogic perspective, we talk about the anahata. We talk about, first of all, the physical heart, more subtle than that, and the subtle body is the anahata chakra, the unstruck sound. More subtle than that is the hridaya, the root, the center, the inner heart. And that's really what we're focused on. That's the goal. And any one of the chakras can be a means to enter that. You can enter to the core by meditating on the 3rd eye. Yogis tell us meditate on the space between the eyebrows. Some say meditate on the breath. Some say meditate on the heart. Any of these are vehicles or opportunities by focusing the mind to penetrate the veil of illusion, to get at the core. So we're talking about chakras being entry points, portals to enter. Shaivism goes a step further. That says any experience in life can be a portal, can be an opening. It says that one should meditate wherever one finds joy. Wherever you find joy, meditate there, And the joy will bring you to the self. Looking at a beautiful sunset. I see a beautiful sunset. I feel a sense of awe and beauty, and I turn within and I recognize, where does that sense of awe, where does the sense of beauty come from? It comes from within me. Me being a sentient experiencer, have the capacity to experience beauty and awe. It's not in the sun, it's within me. And so any experience in life can become an opportunity to experience the self. And not just positive experiences. Vidyambhairava says that in a moment of absolute terror, when you're being chased by a tiger, you're fearing for your life, the tiger's going to eat you. In that moment, if you meditate on the source of the terror, the fear, the intense experience of that's just pure energy that's coming up, that's taking the form of fear. But that energy can take you back to its source, which is pure Shakti and pure awareness. You know, I had a very dear friend who I co-taught with for many years at a church in California. He was a unity minister, and he had a spiritual awakening during World War II. He was a Marine, and he fought in the Battle of Iwo Jima, which was a horrific battle, battling the Japanese. Thousands and thousands of people died, and he was right in the front lines, watching his best friend's head get blown off, and watching someone else bleed out, and being fear of capture. And in the midst of this absolute horror and being filled with terror for his own life, suddenly there was an awakening. Out of this, he realized, he saw all this happening, and he realized, I'm not the body. I mean, he had a full awakening of his inner self. He realized, I'm a spiritual being. He didn't have the language to say, I'm Shiva or I'm the Atman, but he had a spiritual awakening on the battlefield. And this is not uncommon. There are many, many stories, particularly in World War I, of soldiers having an awakening on the battlefield. So even in moments of terror, anger, in a moment of absolute rage and anger, if you have the awareness that anger is just a particular form of energy, a particular Shakti that's taking a form, you can awaken in a moment of anger. In moments of joy, wherever there's an intense experience with the right understanding, you can awaken. You see a beautiful friend, a friend you haven't seen in a long time, the sense of awe. If we focus on the source of that awe, where's it coming from? Listening to beautiful music. This is where I find it really helpful. I'll go listen to a classical Indian music concert, a raga, and about halfway through I'm almost always in tears because the music somehow satisfies my mind. My mind becomes quiet. I become content. When the mind is quiet and content, we turn within, we feel the beauty, and the tears come. The sense of beauty, the sense of awe. Have you had an experience of that? Whether it's a beautiful music or it's a movie. When I watch the movie Casablanca, I love to watch it every few years, and I see the final scene where Humphrey Bogart's saying goodbye to Ingrid Bergman, and I go into tears. It's just so beautiful to see this extraordinary piece of art that has moved me to tears. Where does it come from? A movie's just light projected on the screen, but somehow it triggers something in me that's divine, that's universal. It gives me an experience of the rasa of my own being. You know, Abhinavagupta talks about the 9 major rasas, and rasas are these juices, these experiences of being human, being fully human, and at the same time divine. I don't know that we could say that universally. Some people may, some people not. My own guru had a little bit of a pot belly, and we asked him about that. He was a great yogi. Why did he have a pot belly? He said, you know, that when you go into kumbhak, If you retain the breath outside the body, you become skinny and even emaciated. If the kumbhak takes place on the inhalation, you'll develop a little bit of a pot belly, and this means that you'll be able to give Shaktipat to many, many people. So it's hard to say, there are certain medical practitioners that are intuitive. There's a whole field of medicine where people can intuit what's going on. I wouldn't say necessarily that the pot belly means you have contractions there. Maybe you just like to eat a lot. So every person's awakening and sadhana is completely unique to them. So when we talk about moving from the Muladhara and moving up the chakras, it's not a linear path. It's not like you purify the Muladhara first, and then you go to the Swadhisthana, Some people, this is the Krama system, you can do it in stages and gradually, but the awakened Shakti, the Kundalini, is an omniscient energy. It's the Yana Shakti working within us to get us to the state of unity consciousness as quickly as possible. As quickly as possible. So whatever unique blocks we each have, those will be what gets worked on first, right? So in our tradition, we have a belief that we have lived in previous lifetimes. So many great beings have worked and purified these chakras in previous lifetimes, and just simply need to have the divya, the divine diksha, to realize the self. So it's not necessary that everyone has direct experiences in this lifetime of each of the chakras. So it's very natural that if you had this uprising that went all the way to the crown, that it would affect your knowledge, your wisdom, your perspective. That's something that's very important, is our perspective, our view, how we see the world. What we believe most deeply is what we'll perceive in the world. The function of the senses is to carry out what the mind believes to be true. So we all have inherent belief systems as human beings, even limiting beliefs. And so it's the function of the senses to go out into the world and to find the bits of information that will validate our belief system. We now know that in this room, for example, in any moment, in our field of experience, there's at least 10 trillion bits of information available to us right now. Neuroscience tells us that the human brain is only capable of processing 2,000 bits of information at any one time. So its job is to filter out all the 10 trillion bits of information and find the 2,000 bits of information that will confirm our bias, that will show us the reality that we believe to be true. So when we're living in duality and fully subjected to the limiting beliefs, our mind will create that reality and make it real for us. Once we, through meditation, realize the self, the senses are repurposed. They're no longer going out looking to put together a reality of separation. They now go out and demonstrate the interconnectedness of everything. Instead of seeing duality, they see unity consciousness. They see consciousness everywhere. That's why it's so important for us to, in addition to meditating, to work on our perspective, to work on our view, to work on our understanding. And this is the branch of Jnana Yoga, where we really look at what the scriptures say. What is the nature of reality? Do I have the right view? Am I seeing the world through the eyes of a victim? And everywhere I look, I see sin, sickness, fear, death, and I'm living in a state of paranoia. My senses will find that and validate for me. So I begin to recognize that there are higher teachings, that everything is consciousness, that we actually live in a benevolent universe. Once we can really grasp that, most of us think of we live in a dog-eat-dog world. As Thomas Hobbes, the great British philosopher, says, life is nasty, brutish, and short. You know, it's a famous quote in philosophy. And I think that's the viewpoint of many people. And if that's the viewpoint, your senses will confirm that, and your life, in fact, will be nasty, brutish, and short. That's why we begin to cultivate uplifting thoughts. Everything is consciousness. Everyone is consciousness. This is a benevolent universe. Everything happens for the best. Many, many different thoughts that we can choose. And I like to use these beneficial statements to begin to see the world from that perspective. I'll tell you a story that illustrates this point. Akbar, Birbal. Akbar was a great king, and his prime minister was by the name of Birbal. And in those days, you know, kings chose prime ministers, you know, who were sages. And it's thought that Birbal was maybe a siddha. And he had this habit, this practice of saying, whatever happens, happens for the best. No matter what. Don't worry about it. Happens for the best. So one day the king was getting shaved, and they were getting ready to go on a hunting trip, and he was shaving, and the barber nicked him, and he hit a vein, and it was really a bloody mess, right? And the king, in fact, had to postpone his hunting trip because he had to get this taken care of. And word got back to Birbal, and Birbal said, don't worry about it. Everything happens for the best. Now, the messenger went back to the king and reported to him that Birbal said, everything happens for the best. And the king was furious. He said, bring Birbal here. Send him here. He brought him. He says, I'm going to put you in the dungeon. I'm going to put you in the dungeon and lock you up, you know, and bread and water for you as your punishment. Right? So king healed. Birbal said to himself, everything happens for the best. I don't understand why, but I trust that everything happens for the best. Well, the king decided, he healed, he decided to go on his hunting trip. Right? And so he was out hunting for days and weeks, and he went into a new area that he'd never seen before and got captured by cannibals. Cannibal human flesh. He was captured. They brought him back, and it turns out that they found the king on their high holiday. And partly what they did, they had to have a perfect human sacrifice to appease their god, right? So they prepared the boiling pot. They were going to make a nice soup out of the king, and they were undressing him, ready to put it in. And they noticed he had a big slash on his throat. And they said, we can't make an impure offering to the god. That would be an insult. So they released him, let him go. He's like, God, Birbal was right. Everything does happen for the best. So he rushed back to the prison and immediately pulled Birbal out. And he told him what happened. He said, my God, you were so right. Everything happens for the best. But what about you? You know, I was out hunting and you've been suffering in the dungeon, taking only bread and water in this dirty, filthy place. How is it best for you? Birbal said, you know, I'm your best friend, king. I was planning to go with you on that trip. If I had gone to that trip, I don't have a cut on my throat. I would have been the sacrifice. So everything happens for the best. And I've cultivated that awareness, you know, that when something disappointing happens, I automatically look for, okay, where's the silver lining in this? How is this the best? And back in the 90s, I was teaching in churches in the United States at the Unity churches. And I was at one particular church for 17 years. I was taking this Eastern teaching and bringing it into a Christian form. I could find everything that I learned in India, I could find in the Christian teachings. And this is what I was teaching. Pentecost Sunday was Shaktipad, and the Guru was the Christ, and making all these different comparisons. So I was invited to start teaching at the seminary where they train ministers. And I taught there for a couple of years, and they suggested, well, why don't you apply and become a minister yourself? I said, okay, fine, I'll do that. So I went through all the testing and applied to become a minister, and went back to California, packed all my things, and was ready to move from California to Kansas, where the ministry was. And I got the letter back, from the ministerial program, and I was rejected. I wasn't accepted into the program. I was teaching in the program, but they wouldn't accept me to be a student. And my first reaction was, I remember this, it felt like a kick in the gut that I was being rejected. I wasn't worthy of becoming a minister. It took my breath away, and I had to sit down, and I was crushed. But then I had this thought, everything happens for the best. I don't know how this is for the best, but somehow this is for the best. And it completely shifted my perception of the experience. Instead of feeling rejected, I now felt redirected by the hand of God. I took it as a message. I'm not supposed to be a minister in the church. And it turns out I was meant to return to sannyas and become a Swami. So I took the rejection and said, okay, I've been redirected. And I was eager to find out what was in store. Shortly thereafter, I was invited to come lead the church and go teach in an ashram. And I became the resident teacher of an ashram, and somehow ended up here in India. So the point is that everything happens for the best. And if we cultivate that attitude, that's what our reality will be.